Please, I think we can go live now and then we proceed. It's already 8:30. Yeah.
So I'm admitting people now we are live now.
Okay. So Venu, fun fact is that Professor reminded me that there is an India-Australia match today.
Yes.
Yeah,
that is.
And then I asked Mosmi and Mosmi specifically that okay, what do you suggest? And yeah, but it was a little bit late already. We had already sent a lot of emails. Yeah.
Right. So I think just while ago, TJ was.
But still there are people. I think they are pretty enthusiastic. I guess so. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Gigi was just telling this to me 5 minutes ago before you joined in, Professor. So this is what I told him, that irrespective of whether we're looking, people are watching this live, we have a lot of audience who reviews these or watches these later on when we publish it to YouTube. And I told them, even if we impact, say, 1 or 2 people meaningfully after the session, I think that's still a win from the session. So that's how I would look at it.
Sure. Yeah. I'm happy to be here. Yeah.
Professor, how it would go is I would briefly introduce this concept of TEG. That is what I do initially, and then I would ask Venu to formally introduce you here, and then we will go ahead with your with your talk. And yeah, as I mentioned before, you can take like 35, 40, even 45 minutes, and then we can take up audience questions depending on how much time you have and how many questions they have. It's not like we have to exhaust whole 1.5 hours, but yeah, as soon as we can finish, we will finish it, something like that. Yes, shouldn't be an issue.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. So we see a couple of people. Maybe we wait a minute more. So Jijo, we are already live, right?
Yes.
All right. I think everyone is muted. Everyone's video is shut.
Right. I think whether we can make a start.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's start. So welcome everyone. So I'll briefly talk about this concept of the entrepreneurship gyan, TEG. So as I have been repeating it for previous 4 sessions, so I'll just go through it again. So how I initially thought was sometime last year. Obviously, when I moved to entrepreneurship from an academic side, although from the practice side I was there, but from when I started moving to an academic side, I thought maybe I would do some kind of podcast where it would give a lot more information to people, especially in India, about entrepreneurial research, practice, and build some kind of synergy between the practice and the academic world. And that's how we have been progressing. So we are calling veteran entrepreneurs to this particular show, but we are also calling academicians. For example, now we have Professor Venkat with us on this. So yeah, I thought of it as a podcast, but then when I got this opportunity to lead startup and entrepreneurship special interest group for IIT Bombay Alumni Association, and already Praveen ji, who was taking care of this this SIG, this special interest group, and then I pitched him to him, and he decided that we decided that we would do it kind of a show where we would invite people like Professor Venkat, whose kind of ideas would become kind of very motivational for young entrepreneurs, but also he could bring a lot more a lot more values to this particular event. So yeah, we have been inviting a lot more practitioners because obviously given that the background of IIT Bombay, we have a lot more alumni who are entrepreneurs, but also as as the concept says that we have to build kind of synergies between academic and the practice side. So obviously we would be having more academicians in the near future. Yeah, just to give a brief introduction. So I would I would like to invite Venu to formally introduce Professor Venkat. So please go ahead, Venu.
Thank you, Vaibhav. So first of all, welcome everybody. So we have with us Professor Sankaran Venkataraman, popularly known as Professor Venkat. So he is the MasterCard Professor of Business Administration, and he's the Senior Associate Dean for Faculty and Research at University of Virginia Darden School of Business. He is one of the first of the educational field speakers that we've called, and definitely one of the world's renowned figures. So it's great to have you here with us, Professor. And I think it's a great way for us to start the TEG sessions as well with an academician. He is internationally renowned scholar with over 40,000 citations, and he's an educator in the field of entrepreneurship. He has published extensively in top journals and lectured around the world. The Academy of Management, which is the largest professional body of management educators in the world, has recognized his research by awarding him the inaugural IDEA Award for Foundational Research in Entrepreneurship. And in 2010, the Academy of Management Review cited one of his papers as the most influential in the past decade of papers. Also, aside from the academic side to his interest, he's also heavily involved in corporate planning, executive sort of strategy and guidance and development in new business ventures. He's also founded and created and developed a highly successful new business venture. He also consults Fortune 500 companies, several small companies with regards to strategy discussions, as well as developing or giving ideas to some of these startups and shaping them. He's also been a speaker for the Entrepreneurial Forum, which is a program of the International Trade Administration of the US Department of Commerce. Other sort of distinguished feathers to his hat include he's the first holder of the Brugman Distinguished Chair at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. He's also a Paul Beekle Term Assistant Professor of Management at the Wharton University. Aside from his sort of achievements, he's also one of the most renowned professors within Darden University. He's also been voted as the favorite among Darden students. So those are just some of the introductions. I know if I go ahead and continue with it, we might end the session just with his introductions. So without further ado, we'd like to welcome you, Professor. So Professor Venkat, it's great to have you here. The floor is all yours. And then as folks have questions, they can continue to ask it, and then we'll take it. Vaibhav and I will start taking these questions as we go through the session.
Thank you, Venu. Thank you for that most generous and kind introduction. And also thank you, Vaibhav, for initiating this conversation and inviting me to speak. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here with IIT alumnus, especially IIT Bombay, coming from India. I know what a great achievement that is. I myself tried to get into IITs and did not. I was not successful. So it is, and my parents, in my younger days, they held out the promise that I would be one of those kids who would make it there. Unfortunately, I was not able to make it. So this is my connection to IIT. So I'm for that opportunity. I know you're distinguished people. You've done many things in your life that society would be proud of. And so I'm also grateful that I can join you here today. I will talk a little bit about the entrepreneurial lessons which I have picked up over the years, mainly from my research. But to put the talk in context, maybe I should just spend a little bit of time on the kind of research I have been engaged in, which might give you an idea of how I arrived at the kinds of lessons that I picked out for sharing this morning, or this evening, I should say. So good evening to all the participants. As Vaibhav said, I realized late that the India-Australia first match of this World Cup is going on right now in Chennai, my hometown. And it's turning out to be an exciting match. So I thank those of you who've come to this talk. You're sacrificing that exciting match to be here. So I hope you'll find the talk worthwhile. I actually got interested in entrepreneurship when I joined Wipro way back. I first joined Wipro in '79. And then after working for a few months where I did some studies for Wipro on whether there would be demand for computers in India. This was the late 70s. The computer industry had was not yet born, and Wipro investigated that at that time. I submitted my report and went off to IIM Calcutta to do my MBA. But Wipro got back and hired me to work with them, and they assigned me to the new computer division as a business planning executive, and I was also responsible for a new product development coordination. It was essentially a new spin-off. We had to create a new venture, and as you would know, in the early 80s, it was virgin territory in India for computers. So Wipro was, along with Hindustan Computers Limited and a few others, the first entrance into the field. That's where I got my first taste of entrepreneurship. But in the back of my mind, we were assigned a small group of people in Bangalore and Mysore in Karnataka, where Bengaluru now, assigned to create this new venture. While doing that, I was always interested in academics. I had in the back of my mind that one day I would do a PhD and study and learn. But the experience in Wipro gave me clarity. I became interested in entrepreneurship, and I wanted to pursue my academic interest as well. So in 1984, I quit Wipro and went to USA to do my PhD at University of Minnesota. And I chose entrepreneurship as my field of study. So that's how it all started. And those days, there was no entrepreneurship major. You specialize in organization theory, behavior, or strategic management. So I was one of the first ones to come out as an entrepreneurship scholar, if you will. I successfully finished my PhD and started my career. My first research interest was I started my whole journey from Wipro. So I wanted to understand more deeply the challenges of creating a new business, the initial challenges for an entrepreneur. How do you create something from nothing, starting from scratch? So that was my first set of studies. I published some papers there. And after doing that successfully as a professor, I embarked on my second area of study, which was, I framed the question as, why are some organizations or some firms more entrepreneurial than others? That is, they successfully bring more innovations and new business into the market. Again, coming out of my Wipro experience as well. So that was my second stream of study. And I found some relationship between the first and the second. I did that for a few years and then turned my attention to the third, linked, if you will, idea. And the question there was, why are some regions in the world more entrepreneurial than other regions? So, I was curious about Silicon Valley, Bengaluru, at least from the tech sector, certain areas of Gujarat, certainly places like Boston, Massachusetts, and other regions of the world, which inherently seem to produce new ideas and new ventures than many other places. So that was the third question. After that, I came back to sort of the startup stage, and I met my wonderful colleague and collaborator and co-author, Saraswati. And through her, I became interested again in the question of startups. And she crystallized the question beautifully by asking, what makes some entrepreneurs entrepreneurial? And that is where I rested. So at that point, I started looking more at what do these expert entrepreneurs do? And both Saras and I sort of settled on the question of, there is a method. If you could codify that method, it'll be useful to then think about sort of making entrepreneurship more teachable and more broad and more pervasive. So that's my latest. I'm interested in entrepreneurial methods. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank my many co-authors who have contributed to what I'm about to share with you all. I will not name them because there are too many, but let me put it this way. If you look at my CV, I have many papers, and there are many of those folks who collaborated with me. So the insights that I'm going to share with you, each of them have contributed along with me. And so this is my opportunity to thank them. I would also like to thank many executives who spent time with me in the course of my teaching and consulting on this question of what makes entrepreneurs entrepreneurial, why are some firms more entrepreneurial than others. So with that said, let me just start the substance of my talk with you this morning. Maybe I'll share my slides that I've got. So
yes, please.
systematics. Let me pull it up here.
you already mentioned one of your, great co-authors and, fellow researcher in entrepreneurship, Saras.
Yes, as many of you would have heard of her.
Yeah.
She had collaborators and co-authors. So you'll recognize many of the lessons from her evaluation idea, which I am using as part of this lecture as well. So maybe I should start with the first. Can you see my?
Yes, we can see. Please continue.
Is it, how is it coming up? Is it coming up as?
Yeah, so it's not coming up on the entire screen, but still we can see it. We see also your next slides and the slides below. Is it the same case with everyone else? Yeah, now it's better. Yeah.
Okay. Let me push this cursor out to the side. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. If you spend some time in business, if you experienced person, if you have a lot of knowledge, you will have ideas. You will have ideas of, businesses. You'll have ideas of ventures. You'll have things that you could bring to market. We all have ideas, but it's important to appreciate that an idea is not an opportunity. Opportunities are rarely found. They have to be created and earned. And each individual, as individuals, we perceive opportunities uniquely. There might be different spaces in which you could introduce new ventures, new ideas. But in each space, each individual has their own unique experiences, knowledge, values, preferences, etc. It's that combination that allows you to bring something to the world that is uniquely yours. But acting on those opportunities is difficult. So if you take the area of social media or internet or any sphere, there can be hundreds of ideas, and many of those ideas actually can come to market. But most people do not end up acting on their ideas, because acting on these ideas and actually making them opportunities is a very, very difficult thing. There's a lot of inertia, but more important than inertia, there's fear of failure. And of course, there's also loss, or the behavioral psychologists call loss aversion. These set of factors, loss aversion is basically the fear of losing what you already have. That is your endowment and your wealth that you've already accumulated. You don't want to put that at risk, and there is a natural aversion to losing that. And it's one of the most predominant aversions that human beings have, which has been pretty well established by behavioral psychologists. Now, the last thing I will say here is entrepreneurship is a method, as I indicated earlier. And if you look at expert entrepreneurs and how they bring ideas into the market, how they bring ideas into the world, they have a particular way of approaching the problem. And through Saras and some of my work and some other collaborators, we think that method can be codified. And this is a method that can be used by society to solve problems. It is a very beneficial thing of bringing new ideas into the world. And that method is accessible and available to each of us. So either we use it or we lose it. And my belief over the years of doing research is the conviction that each of us can be entrepreneurs in whatever setting that we may choose to be, either as independent entrepreneurs or corporate entrepreneurs or academic entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs, in whatever field you might be. That method and that enterprise is available to each of us. And if we don't use that aspect of our capability set, if you will, we're leaving value, or we're leaving money on the table. So the entrepreneurial method involves a few principles. I'm going to articulate 8 principles today, which I hope you'll find interesting. The first principle is do act. The people who actually get ideas to make them opportunities and eventually into successful business ventures, they take that first step, and that is the step of acting on the idea. And one of the things that the effectuation research has taught us is that you really don't need elaborate business plans, a prediction of the future, or a crystallized idea in order to act. You can start the process of accumulating the venture with just what you have, what you know, who you know, and who you are. Just that initial endowment is sufficient to put some investment into an idea. And so that's the first principle. Do act. It is always easy to procrastinate. And I'll talk about two principles together here. The second principle is to establish affordable loss. That is, only risk what you can afford to lose. I already alluded to the fact that this loss aversion is a pretty big issue in life. We talk about fear of failure. It's actually not fear of failure that holds us back, because if you think about it, throughout our lives, we have failed. Failure has been the essential component of making progress, of learning something. And we start that right from childhood. We get up and try to walk. We're not successful. We fall down. We fall down many times. But over time, we learn. We pick ourselves up and walk. When we use language, when we want to express ideas, we fail. It's trial and error. We try many things. And through the process of trial and error and continuous failure, we become better and better. So as human beings, we are conditioned to failing. Think about the early days. If you're a quantitative person, you probably struggled with expression and stories and poetry and prose. If you were a poet, you probably struggled with mathematics. I myself struggled with math, made many mistakes. Failure was part of life. And we got over that. So if you think about it, it's not failure or the fear of failure that holds us back. It's actually the opposite. It's when you've succeeded and accumulated a good amount of reputation, resources, wealth, and money, you get to this condition where you are afraid to lose what you've already accumulated. That, I think, is the biggest concept that is holding a lot of people from acting. And so this overcoming loss aversion is a big part. Now, if you can establish this idea, which is very subjective, that is, if you can establish your affordability for loss, then that acts as a great motivation for taking action. It biases you towards action and reduces the bias for analysis, because the bias for analysis is really a way of not actually incurring loss. And of course, if you can establish the affordable loss principle for yourself, then if the venture doesn't succeed, you will still live to see another day. And so you'll get up and walk again. So the second important principle is establishing the affordable loss. Only risk what you can afford to lose at the initial investments in a venture. The third principle is, at the early stages, you don't have cash flow, you don't have resources. Resources are always constrained. So you should use those resources wisely. And that's the principle of do bootstrap. Bootstrapping is a very Western or American English phrase, which means picking yourself up by your bootstrap. It essentially means that using the resources that you already have at your command. And in India, we use the word jugaad, the idea of lean, hack, bricolage. They all address the same thing, which is making do, conserving resources, finding shortcuts, improvisation. These are all ideas. And so good entrepreneurs pervasively bootstrap their ventures, especially the early stages where the uncertainty is high. And so any investment has a high probability of loss. And therefore, the cost of capital, the cost of resources would be very high. So the third principle is bootstrap. And from a methodological point of view, you can crystallize bootstrap into several steps. And I've outlined the steps here. What does bootstrap mean? You can think of it this way. It's a hierarchical principle. Do not buy new what you can buy used. Do not buy used what you can lease or rent. Do not lease or rent what you can borrow. Do not borrow what you can beg. When you beg, you incur a moral obligation. Do not beg what you can scavenge. That is, use waste and other people's waste. Do not scavenge what you can get for free. Do not take for free what someone will pay you for. Do not take payment for what someone will bid for. Create an auction. Now, this is the idea of bootstrapping. Even if you don't practice all of this, this way of thinking conserves resources. It keeps potential loss very low. and it significantly reduces cost of capital. So I would say the third principle of entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial startup, the entrepreneurial method, is do bootstrap. The fourth principle that we've learned from good entrepreneurs is they are shameless. In society, we are taught not to seek obligations. We are taught to fend for ourselves. We are taught to be self-sufficient. There's almost a stigma in many societies attached to asking for help, depending on other people for your progress or success. So there's a stigma attached to it. But good entrepreneurs are they're not afraid to ask. They ask for anything and everything. They'll ask for advice. They'll ask for money. They'll ask for resources. They'll ask for referrals. They'll ask you to introduce them to potential customers. They'll ask for, liberal payment conditions, etc. If you do not ask, you will not get. You will be surprised at what you can get if you ask. So the fourth principle would be develop a thick skin and be shameless. Try and minimize your own resources and ask others for resources. An important principle here is what is a risk for you is actually an opportunity for someone else for an investment. There is an asymmetric condition between risk between two different entities. A risk for one is actually an opportunity for another person, because for that person, the risk is the one that they need to include in their portfolio of investments, for example. And therefore, your risk is their investment opportunity, that if you succeed, they get a significant return. Even from a customer's point of view or client's point of view, your startup venture might be an additional option for them in the future for an important idea or a product or for a secondary supply source, etc. So if you can reframe risk into its symmetric and corresponding component, investment, then it allows you to be more shameless about asking others for resources. The fifth principle is what we would call do leverage contingencies. At the early stages, I can definitely not predict. In fact, I can predict with absolute certainty that I don't know where you're going to go, whether you'll succeed or fail. That's a highly uncertain condition or situation. But what I can predict with 100% accuracy and perfection is that you will have surprises and shocks in the course of the evolution of the venture. What is a shock or a surprise? A shock or a surprise means the assumptions that you started out with, the information that you had is not accurate. The world has given you new information. That means you have to adapt and you have to improvise. And that's an important thing to understand. A shock or a surprise is a good thing because you've got new information and you've got to take that information seriously and act on it, which leads us to the sixth principle. The sixth principle is if you have shocks or surprises, then you should pivot. So do pivot. Again, because of a shock or a surprise is actually the introduction of new information, you have to abandon your earlier plans. Your business plan has probably become obsolete, or at least it's got information in it that is no longer relevant, that is no longer useful. You have to update it, which means you have to iterate your idea. So the sixth principle is when you have times of shocks and surprises, use that information, leverage that contingency, and do pivot. Good entrepreneurs will always pivot, and that's what marks them out, or that's what enables them to succeed in the future. Because pivoting is an essential aspect of building a business or a venture. Now, pivot happens at various stages. There are several stages to success in a venture, and the venture evolves through these different stages. So you have to, what I would call, you have to learn to crawl before you can walk, before you can run, and before you can sprint. What are those stages? Initially, when you start up, what you have is a problem of existence or concept proof. You have to actually establish that there is a problem or need in the market or in society. So the first question that arises that you have to prove is there really a problem or a need, or can one be articulated? And the second issue related to the problem is there really a solution or a product, or can one be created? So it's really a proof of concept stage. And that's the initial problem. You can't look farther ahead than that. You can have your business plans and things like that, which are much, which look farther out. But if you don't get past the concept or proof stage, you don't get to the next stage. That's the execution. The first execution is establishing the proof of concept. Unfortunately, what a lot of people do is they keep refining their business plan because of this loss aversion, especially when they have some information and data, and spreadsheets are so easily available that they keep refining their spreadsheet rather than actually, going out and talking to clients, talking to potential customers, talking to people, constructing something in their, in America, we would say garage, but whatever is the equivalent in other parts of the world. So that's the first stage. Now, when you successfully have a concept, you then get to feasibility proof. And invariably, when you do the concept testing, you will get new information. You will have a shock or a surprise, and you have to pivot. You get to feasibility proof. That's the second stage. The feasibility proof also has a set of questions that you have to engage in. That's the execution part. Is it doable? Can we do it? Who else do we need in order to be able to do this venture, actually produce the product, create the logistics required, actually get the products into the hands of the market and people? Maybe this is a doable idea. Maybe this is a good idea, but not for me, not for this team. It's for someone else to do it because they are the ones with the right capabilities. These are the important questions at the feasibility stage. And then the third important market, is there a market? Will someone other than my mom want it and pay for it? It's possible that there is a small market, but people are buying it from you because of goodwill, because of your social capital. And there's not really a large enough market for it. So the second stage of a venture is feasibility proof. It's only after you get through the feasibility proof, you get to the profitability proof, which is the third stage. And invariably, moving from feasibility to profitability, there is a pivot opportunity because you'll get new shocks and you'll get new surprises. The venture has to be reinterpreted and reiterated. The third stage is the profitability proof, which is a question of, can we scale? Maybe it is scalable, but perhaps not by us. In fact, when a venture is scalable, it gets visible in the market. People start talking about it, and competitors and others will come into the space. So that means you have to be able to compete. The question becomes, can we win? So it's not just enough to be able to scale it. You have to be able to scale it and win the competition that will eventually occur as a result of that scaling. Invariably, there's a pivot there. Many of you know that often when the venture starts to mature and enters the growth stage, the founders often have to leave the company because they have the skills for founding. They have the skills to do the feasibility aspects, but they are not the right people to grow the venture and take it to profitability or even take it public. Invariably, there is a pivot point there, and there's a change of team, the new people come into the venture, etc. So that's the third, the profitability proof. And once you have a pivot there, you come to the final stage, which is worthiness proof. Yes, it might be making profit, but is it worth all the risk that you've taken up? Is it worth the investment you have put into it? It's the worthiness proof. Is it worth winning? Is it worth winning for us? Is it worth winning for society? Are we better off with the resources having been spent somewhere else? Maybe we should have done some other business or worked for another company. And same thing for society. Is this the best way for society to have used its resources? It's the worthiness proof. Now, the thing is, when we write up our business plans, we invariably anticipate and write up the business plan for profitability proof and worthiness proof. That's putting the cart in front of the horse. Profitability and worthiness is really interesting only after the feasibility proof. So what good entrepreneurs do is they show a capability to stay in the moment, take action, try new things, get the proof of concept, create the minimum viable product, get the early customers, iterate along the process, then worry about profitability and worthiness proof. If you pay too much attention to profitability and worthiness at the early stages, there will be a tendency to keep refining your Excel spreadsheets and build scenarios as opposed to making progress through execution. Talking about Excel spreadsheet, what are the right questions to ask at the early stages of a venture is an interesting question. I would offer to you the following set of questions, which are sufficient in the early stages. No need to worry about profitability. No need to worry about return on investment. No need to worry about payback period. No need to worry about strategy and competition. When you want to first take an action, these questions are sufficient. Is this a good first idea for a new entrepreneur? I'm assuming, I'm talking to new entrepreneurs here. Have you identified a good starting or entry point? Does it lend itself to bootstrapping or a lean startup? Is there a minimum viable product that strikes a good balance between affordable loss and minimum required scale? Does it leverage your core skills and competencies? Does it have room for a partner or a team? We know from research that, at least in the Western concept, especially the American context, that ventures started by individuals have a much higher probability of failure than ventures started by complementary teams. Would it lead to new corridors of opportunities? That is pivoting possible? Would it enable pivoting in the future? And finally, does it allow you to make mistakes and still survive? Will failure prove fatal? Let me pause here. How am I doing for time? I hope I'm still okay. Yeah.
Yes, it's all right. It's all right, Professor. Please continue. You have sufficient time.
Great. Next, we come to the seventh principle. Talking of teams, what you'll find is even if you start your idea on your own, along the way, you'll have surprises and shocks. New people will be interested. You will be in a position to ask people for everything from advice to resources. So that's the point where you leverage key partners. There will be people who are eager to come into your venture and would put some skin in the game. But skin in the game is they make some investment that there is a potential for loss for them. Those are the kinds of people to engage in your venture because there's a stake in it for them. They're interested in the outcome. And there is some skin in the game for them. That is, they would like the venture to succeed. Those are the right kinds of people to be partners. And they are the ones who should be part of your overall team. Some are within your venture and others are outside as suppliers, customers, investors, etc. So the seventh principle is do leverage key partners. And the last principle is do not predict, but shape. This goes back to the idea of preparing business plans. Yes, business plans are required. Unless you do business plans, you won't get the incentive, motivation, or the worthiness idea that this is something worth pursuing. So it is understandable, it is acceptable that people will think about crafting a business plan before they embark on a venture. But this is what I would advise based on the studies that we've done so far. Don't try to fit your venture to your original business plan, but shape the venture along the previous 7 rules. The later stage venture is always very different from the original idea. This is the idea of effectuating or effectuation. So these are the 8 principles that I think underlie a successful entrepreneurial method, which we have learned over time, both through research and talking to entrepreneurs that might be useful for people to think about. I also mentioned, so this is the first question, the combination of what happens at startup, what is the kind of methodology that we can codify at startup. And I would call it the effectuation method, which was originally pioneered by Professor Saraswati. The second question I embarked on was this question of what makes some organizations or firms more entrepreneurial than others. So let me spend a few minutes on that particular question. So what makes some organizations more entrepreneurial than others? I would crystallize this into saying that managers and even firms have two kinds of orientation, or you can classify them into two kinds of orientation. I'm going to call the first orientation the managerial orientation. And the second orientation is the entrepreneurial orientation. Now, the companies or organizations which tend to be more entrepreneurial than others have an inherent or intrinsic, or they have learned to become comfortable with the entrepreneurial orientation. Whereas the firms that tend to be more bureaucratic or less risk-taking or less innovative or a little bit conservative, if I could use that word, tend to exhibit a dominant managerial orientation. Both orientations are important. In fact, we've learned over time that the managerial orientation is supremely important for running an efficient and effective organization. In fact, the last 100 years, before the turn of this century, was the age of managerial capability to organize and scale large-scale organization. And so that orientation is fundamental to growth and success. But it also has a particular viewpoint or a particular mindset and a way of thinking about problems that gets in the way of creating new things. To create new things, you have to have this entrepreneurial orientation. So again, I've got about 10 ideas here where the contrast between the managerial orientation and the entrepreneurial orientation can be brought forward. In the managerial orientation, the primary focus is on resources currently controlled, whereas in entrepreneurial orientation, the focus is on external opportunity. In the managerial orientation, there is a project mindset. Put all your eggs in one basket and take care of the basket very well. Whereas in the entrepreneurial orientation, there is more of a portfolio mindset. If you want to succeed, then you have to let 100 flowers bloom. But those one or two home runs, or one of those two great flowers, will make up the investments and losses and the risks in the other 90 or so ventures that did not succeed. So you manage a portfolio in order to succeed, whereas in the managerial orientation, you manage a project to success. In the managerial orientation, you want to avoid failure at any cost. Whereas in the entrepreneurial orientation, you appreciate that success requires failed trials. That is, success is a result of trial and error. In the managerial orientation, you want to win at any cost because the whole idea is to win in a competitive market. Whereas in the entrepreneurial orientation, failure comes with the territory. So you have to fail fast, you have to fail often, but you have to fail smart. That means you learn from your failure and make progress, and you have to fail cheap, or you have to fail in a way where you fail below your affordable loss. The managerial orientation, there are inbuilt incentives for growth. Growth is the real issue here. Whereas in the entrepreneurial orientation, it's learning. You want to learn about new territories, you want to learn about new domains and new markets. The managerial orientation, the bias is towards making large investments. Small businesses do not solve the growth problems of large companies. So the managerial orientation is the larger the investment, the better off you're going to be. Whereas in the entrepreneurial orientation, you make little bets, you constantly experiment, you test hypotheses. It's a hypothesis testing mindset. In the managerial orientation, you ask, what is the ROI? Return on investment is a key metric. Whereas in the entrepreneurial orientation, the question is, what is the affordable loss? In the managerial orientation, I would rather not invest in a potentially good idea rather than persist with a potentially bad idea. That is, beware of false positives. I do not want to make type 1 errors. Whereas in the entrepreneurial orientation, you embrace false negatives. I would rather persist with a potentially bad idea so that I do not reject prematurely a potentially great idea or a home run. I would embrace type 2 error. The managerial orientation, I would like to grow it alone. I want to control the venture. I want to keep as much of the pie for myself. The entrepreneurial orientation tries and distributes risk, gets others in. Partnering and collaborating is the route to success. The size of the pie is more important than the slice of the pie. In the managerial orientation, there is a natural bias towards predicting and forecasting because you're already in a bureaucratic environment. You have a lot of information, and therefore you can do the spreadsheets and you can have great certainty over your projections. Whereas in the entrepreneurial orientation, there is a more bias towards shaping or effectuating. And finally, the managerial orientation, there is a bias and emphasis to managing through business plans. Whereas in the entrepreneurial orientation, you manage through milestones. Show me the proof of concept, show me the minimum viable product, show me the first set of customers, show me that you can turn a profit, and so on and so forth. So these are the things that we've learned from our studies about organizations and what makes some organizations more successful than others. Let me summarize with a few final thoughts, and then we can open it up for any questions or comments that you all might have. My final thoughts are, it's important to take steps where you can move yourself from a bias for analysis to a bias for action, mainly because of both inertia as well as loss aversion. The second is, I would say, this is a question you can ask yourself in the past 6 months or 1 year. Did I stretch myself? Did I stretch my team? Did I take some risks? Did I encourage and inspire my team to take some risks within your affordable loss? Was I creative? Did I encourage and inspire my team to be creative? If you don't stretch or take some risks today, you will have to overstretch and take on significant risk tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, because that's the reality in a competitive marketplace. The risks will catch up with you. So you have to continuously stretch yourself as an organization so that you can continue to stay at the forefront. Good entrepreneurs manage risk. They outsource risk to those who can best handle it. What is risk for you is investment for someone else. Good judgment comes from, I like this saying, I think it's from a prominent trader in Mumbai. Unfortunately, I've forgotten that person's name, but I would like to acknowledge this wise comment from that trader. Good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment. If you make or allow your team to make small errors today, you will avoid the big errors tomorrow. Become ambidextrous. Both managerial orientation and entrepreneurial orientation add a lot of value. If you can be good at both, then you are ambidextrous. If you understand these two, then you'll use each of those approaches at the appropriate time and in the appropriate context. If you think your dominant managerial orientation mindset, then your growth path, your development path is to get more comfortable with our entrepreneurial orientation. Make some small adjustments, do some small experiments, take some little risks, and over time, you'll get more and more comfortable and proficient in entrepreneurial orientation. By the same token, if you're excessively entrepreneurial and you get bored with growth and scale, then your development path might come by developing more managerial orientation. Each adds value to the other. So an effective executive, in fact, the higher you go up in the organization, the more skilled you should be in both of these. So becoming ambidextrous would be useful. You could also become part of the support system for entrepreneurship. Even if you might not do your own venture, if you understand entrepreneurship well, then you can become a supporter of entrepreneurship. You can do that by becoming an investor yourself. You can do that by supporting new ventures, by being their first customers or their first suppliers. You can be an advisor to them, especially when they are at the growth stage or scaling stage. You can participate in the entrepreneurial economy in a variety of ways. And you're all significant people with great knowledge and skills. So I'd encourage you to think about being a support system for entrepreneurship. And my last thought I would like to leave with you is this idea that the enterprise gene is in all of us. If you think about it, we're all products of evolution. We didn't get here by accident. We got here by surviving. We've survived all kinds of challenges, hostility, and things that would have been put in our way on this earth, where to be here, we've overcome all of those things, which means inherently we have a DNA for survival and enterprise, which means that the gene is in us. Unfortunately, because of the secure world in which we live, that gene is dormant, which means it has to be triggered. And by not using that gene, we leave value on the table. Let me give you a simple illustration. Let's say many of you are parents, I'm sure. Let's say you have a gifted child. And think about what you would do for that child. You will move heaven and earth to make sure that the child achieves or realizes their full potential. You will act in all kinds of creative and enterprising ways in order to help the child develop their gift. By the same token, God forbid, your child has a great disease or life-threatening issue. You would move heaven and earth to make sure that the child is going to survive, recover, and flourish. All your enterprise instincts will come to the fore. You will behave like an entrepreneur. Your entrepreneurship gene will be triggered. So my final thought for you all is, if you care deeply about something, you will behave entrepreneurially. So let me stop there. I hope it's given you some food for thought, and then open up my session for any comments, observations. If this resonated with you, please do share that with me.
Yes, Professor, I think all of them are already, quite, they found it quite interesting. So I would request Venu, maybe, you could start with the questions from the audience.
Sure, Vaibhav. I think we've got a lot of questions while
Yeah.
you were going through the slides,
Yeah.
Professor. Probably we'll just start by picking one of the earlier questions that we'd gotten. So first question was, during the sessions, like one of the questions was the pivot slide. Was it sort of like a milestone check, or is it something that you start off with? Are these the questions that people should have? I know the slide says do it, but are these considerations people should have while they start doing it, or is it something that you do midway through it?
I think it's an iterative process. There are some people who naturally have a bias for action. Those people will probably start doing stuff. It might be good for those kinds of action-oriented people to step back and reflect a little more. So their pivots would be the reflective moments. What could that be? One could be that they have a new team member, or they seek a new team member, and that team member tends to be a little more analytical. Similarly, the person who has a bias for analysis would benefit from having pivot points or pivot moments which forces them to act. And that can be a new team member, or it can be some kind of an event that forces them to put a stop to analysis and take an action. I don't know if that helps, but it's subjective in the sense that you want to do the opposite of your precondition. So that's how I want pivot. Yeah.
That's an interesting take, Professor Venkat, because I think when you look at it, like I think this adds to the adage, right? Like one size fits all doesn't work in life, and this definitely makes sense, because if somebody's sitting on an idea, a lot of people tend to get fantastic ideas, and they don't do anything about it. Personally, back in 2007, I got this idea of a cab aggregator, and then a few years later, I see Ola and Uber happening. So I'm sure people in general have a tendency to do similar things, like they get fantastic ideas. But just how do you understand, and this has been one of the questions, how do you understand that there's a market for such ideas? Like, is this going to be viable? How do you get some of those foresights? Because a lot of people, when they start off with the entrepreneurial journey, they might not know a lot of it. And there are few people that they know whom to reach out to with regards to advice. Although that tendency is slowly changing with a lot of advisors and mentors, but still that's something that, how is this idea going to pan out is a key question that people have. So any advice on that?
Yeah. Well, today we have a lot more resources and institutions, if I could use that word, to help us become entrepreneurs. The sooner you engage with people, because at the end of the day, markets are people, money is people, employment is people. So the more you engage with people, the better off you are. Which means that if you have a network, talk to your friends, ask them to refer you to somebody they know who would value this particular idea or who has a problem that this would be a solution to. That's putting some investment in the idea and making it an opportunity, right? And you're from IIT Mumbai network and probably a larger IIT network. You can't get a better network than that in the world. There will be someone who knows somebody who is interested in that problem or who's already working on something similar. That's how you make progress. What might happen through that process is pivot points might happen. They might give you an idea which is different from yours, or they might ask you to investigate something, or they might give you a connection to someone else, which will allow you to make progress. In fact, that might be the way through which you can get your early investment too. Because the client has a problem, it's a potential customer. They need to solve the problem. They cannot do it on their own. Here is somebody who's offering something that might be a solution. They might give you that initial investment. They might even promise to be a first customer if you can develop a minimum viable product. But now the minimum viable product has a context. It has a purpose. It has a use. You'd rather develop the product for that use than something abstract in your spreadsheet. Saying this is the market, these are the needs that they have, and therefore, this will be the theoretical model of my product. This is a far better way of approaching it. So the other institutions are accelerators, incubators, and things of that nature. A lot of universities have them. IIT itself has it, I'm sure. So if you're genuinely interested, don't have to give up your day job. You can still, set up some kind of a shop, so to speak, in one of those incubators and start the process. What happens is when you get to an incubator, you're already in an entrepreneurial network. You'll start to meet people who are relevant to your problem, relevant to your ideas and things of that nature. You're sort of self-selecting a universe which will allow you to make progress. I hope that is helpful.
Professor, that is interesting. In fact, because you were mentioning about IIT Bombay network and the larger IIT network, which we call in India as Pan IIT. In fact, there is a body in US as well, Pan IIT US network as well, which is working. And by the way, we are just going to have this this event very soon in Bengaluru. The name of that event is also Pivot, by the way, and that is the same basically. That is Pan IIT World of Technology, and there are a lot of entrepreneurs will be coming together and building the same kind of network what you were just mentioning. I just took this opportunity to kind of focus on that as well. That is pretty much into the picture. But then the idea is that people know it, people access it, people utilize it, and understand that how these networks could help them possibly. That is something moving in that direction.
Our title.
So that is the title, by the way, Pivot. Yeah. Okay, so the next question is from GS Rao, rather a comment, but I would like to elaborate briefly on that because I have been following your research, so I'm aware that that is something you can focus on. So the comment is that your opening ball idea is not an opportunity, got me out with a hit wicket. I thought the idea is what triggers the entrepreneurial journey. So we had, for example, very recently we had Kamal Rekhi ji. He's a veteran entrepreneur from IIT Bombay, and in fact he was the one who established Kamal Rekhi Institute of Information Technology at IIT Bombay. And he also mentioned the same, that idea is nothing basically. How you implement is the key thing. So maybe you would also like to elaborate from your research perspective that what is the key difference between idea implementation and how does that that ecosystem or role plays there?
Well, if you think you have to have an idea to become an entrepreneur, then you've already lost the game.
Okay. All right.
An entrepreneur. Because every venture, very few ventures are independent entrepreneurs. Almost all of them have teams, which means you don't have to have an idea to be an entrepreneur. You've got to be in the middle of other people who have ideas. That's one. Second, you don't have to be an independent person to be an entrepreneur. You can be an entrepreneur within the large company. Companies have ideas. There might be all kinds of things within the company, within the organization, which might be a spark for an entrepreneur. In fact, that's the best way to become an entrepreneur. Do it on OPM, we call it, other people's money. There's nothing wrong with that. Learn to become an entrepreneur on other people's money. That is, join somebody else's venture. And you don't even have to do it full time. Be an advisor, help them in the evenings, do some work for them. You might be able to offer all kinds of value to them, but participate in the process, learn through that process. And maybe one day you'll be ready to have your own idea and become an entrepreneur through your idea. Make your mistakes in the large company, take some risks. What is loss aversion? The loss aversion in large company is, oh, I lose my name. I lose my title. I lose my reputation. I lose my brand. There will be you'll go down the ladder before you can go up again, right? Those are the losses in a large company. That's the loss aversion. I've already reached this stage. I've already created so much brand equity for myself. What will people think? I'm not going to try this, right? So what is entrepreneurial action in a large company? Take an idea from somewhere, somebody else's idea. Maybe they're not doing it. You put some investment into it. That's what I mean by an idea is not an opportunity. An opportunity is actual investment, actual risk, a stake that is added to that idea, where there's a potential for gain, but there's also a potential for loss. Because when you have an idea, the only loss you have is your brain will keep mulling it over and it'll not pay attention to something else that you could have devoted attention to, right? That's, for most of us, that is costless.
And okay, so just a follow-up question from my end. So how is it different for a researcher as compared to an entrepreneur, let's say? So researchers do also have ideas. So do you think it's pretty similar for researchers when it comes as compared to entrepreneurs, or for researchers maybe ideas are a lot more relevant as compared to entrepreneurs?
No, I think it's absolutely the same thing. We are in the marketplace of ideas. It's a competitive marketplace. We have a lot of ideas and it's in our head. But the person who actually puts it down in a public forum that is shareable and then gets citations for it, and then on top of that is able to get grants, those are the real entrepreneurs. If successful professors are those who attract a lot of doctoral students.
Uh-huh.
They are the ones who attract other professors to come and work with them. They are the ones who attract the NSF funding, National Science Foundation funding, National Institute of Health funding. They are the ones who are able to, go to conferences, put their ideas forward, jostle, and get their ideas into journals so that it goes into public space. They are the ones who companies come searching for, saying, hey, I want to take and commercialize your idea. Here's your equity. Right? So academic entrepreneurship is same as regular entrepreneurship, it's just a different context. Same thing in policy entrepreneurship, right? You could be policy entrepreneur. How do you get new laws and regulations introduced? That's a competitive market. You can behave entrepreneurially in those kinds of markets as well. I think entrepreneurship is just starting a new business and making it successful. Entrepreneurship is a method, it's a mindset, and it's a way of creating value in the world. And that has a lot of, and we have it in us already. It's a gene, I'm convinced.
Yeah.
And so the question is, how do we take what is latent to us and then bring it out?
Yeah, fantastic. So, Venu, please continue. Yeah.
Right, Professor. I think just some of these points, when you put them into a formulaic approach, they definitely force us to think in a certain structured manner, which I think a lot of people generally tend to lack, especially when you start to begin an entrepreneurial journey. So I think that formulaic approach, and we have a comment from Mr. Jayesh Desai, who's put it. So we have a saying that the value of an entrepreneur is not measured by their net worth or assets, but by how much loss they can afford and still sustain the business. So he says that I thought that pivot had more to do with a point of some failure and using that fail fast idea to shape the business. Such points are pivotal in the journey. So that I believe, I think resonates with a lot of people as well, just highlighting that risk appetite that people can take, and knowing that risk appetite at the start helps people to know what they can afford to lose at the start and ensure that people set in boundaries than enter too deep in the water and realize, oh no, probably I'm failing. So I think those structured approach is definitely something that a lot of people will sort of appreciate at this stage. We have a question by Mr. Pawan, who's
Side to that as well, Venu, that I'd like to mention.
Yes,
Yes,
Professor.
effort or realizing your affordable loss might be a source of pivot, might be a point for pivot, that, or the impending failure might motivate that. But the other side of it is success can also be a pivot point. For example, and failure may have nothing to do with it. I'll take two great examples, both Apple and Microsoft, where their pivotal moments had nothing to do with failure, but a new opportunity coming up. In the case of Apple, the pivotal point was when Steve Jobs demanded to be given a demonstration in Xerox PARC. And Xerox PARC in the Silicon Valley area already had a personal computer, it had a mouse, it has a graphical user interface, it has a laser printer, and it had local area networking. All that was right there in front of him. And a lady engineer was forced to give him a demonstration. At that time, Apple's idea was still very rudimentary and basic. It had a keyboard and a screen and some coding. But when Jobs saw the graphical user interface, the mouse, he focused on that. And that was all he paid attention to. And he said, that's what we need to do. We need to be able to use the graphical user interface to make this conversation between the human being and the computer easy and straightforward. That was a pivotal moment. The world is different because of that moment. Xerox PARC never brought a computer to the market, never brought a laser printer to the market. They also had PDF. The Adobe PDF, the engineer was working in Xerox PARC. He came out of Xerox PARC in order to commercialize his idea. Local area networking. So the rudiments of internet was already there in Xerox PARC. They didn't bring to the world internet. Same thing with Microsoft. IBM went to Microsoft and asked for an operating system. They didn't have one. So Bill Gates turned them away. They had basic compilers and they were doing compilers at that point in time. And so IBM went to Silicon Valley, went to talk to somebody else. And that person goofed, did not grab the opportunity for an operating system, and made a big blunder. And so IBM went back to Bill Gates and said, hey, will you develop a new operating system for us? And Bill Gates said, okay, we'll try. And then they went in local Seattle area and started looking for who might have an operating system. And they found one very rudimentary operating system called DOS, Desk Operating System. And they paid $50,000. And the rest is history. They converted that to MS-DOS and sold it to IBM. Didn't sell it outright. They took royalties. Again, the world is different. Now, those are pivot points, but they're pivot point, nothing to do with failure. They were just opportunities that came by because of what they were doing. And remember, Apple's pivot point, Steve Jobs' pivot point came by, do ask. He demanded to be shown a demonstration.
But Professor, I think that is also connected to the previous question that, you not necessarily need to have an idea. For example, somebody came to these guys with some problem and they were just trying to solve the particular problem. They didn't have an idea about it, but just for finding the solution to that problem, they came up with this entrepreneurship or this business in general.
So both kinds of entrepreneurship is possible. Problems looking for solutions, solution looking for problems.
Fantastic.
We need to restrict ourselves.
right. And aptly put, the first line's first sort of formulaic approach was to it. So that makes sense. Like a lot of people tend to sit and ponder over the idea a lot more. And as you had alluded to earlier, we sit on spreadsheets, given there's a lot of data easily available to us with different sources. So there's no dearth of, say, surveys, customer sort of responses towards some of these competitors, and people sit to overanalyze these than invest the time into their own products and spend that ingenuity there.
One good question to ask is it better to spend 1 lakh on a market survey or to take that 1 lakh and spend it in some other ways towards a more rudimentary product, which I can then take and go and show it to people and ask them, would you like this? Why wouldn't you buy it? What is wrong with this? What is your problem? Why is it not satisfying your problem? Because there's something tangible and concrete. So I think the question to be asked is, what is the most value that you can get out of that 1 lakh rupees? In fact, if you can get that 1 lakh from somebody who actually has the problem, then you're a real entrepreneur. And that skill comes when you've done 2 or 3 ventures. I will give you a very simple idea. I had a student way back in my Wharton days. He had developed a new kind of synthetic and leather glove for golfers, right? At the initial point when they use their, getting off the tee. So he wanted to get into the market. He already had the prototype and product, and he's working very well. So what he did, this was way back, so it happens now more commonly, but in those days it was a lot more rare. In fact, quite rare. So he developed the glove and he sponsored a hole-in-one contest for a professional golf tournament. And he offered $100,000 reward for any professional who came to that 3-par hole and would make a hole-in-one. And then he got the $100,000 insured by Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's of London does these kinds of idiosyncratic one-off insurance. So he got it insured for how much? The amount is not important. I think $5,000 or something like that. So he got it insured for $5,000. That the probability of a professional acing a hole or making a hole-in-one in a 3-par hole is 1 in whatever, 300, 500, even lower odds. So he got that insured. Now, every time a marquee player, a prominent player came to the hole, the TV station that was covering would cover this reward. Now, the TV station gave him about 25 minutes of coverage over those 4 days. 150 golfers came to the hole each day for the first 2 days. That's 300, and 50 golfers in the last 2 days. So there were 400 visits to the hole. So during those 400 visits to the hole of several people, big name players, he got coverage. He got 25 minutes of advertising coverage. Now, the tournament was sponsored by a prominent company, and they paid for $430,000 for coverage. So he got $430,000 worth, and they got 25 minutes of coverage. So he got $430,000 of free advertising, for which he paid $5,000.
Fantastic.
Nobody made a hole-in-one. What is the principle of this? The principle of this is he found the right party to take the risk for advertising. The value of advertising is $430,000. He created a particular mechanism by which the person who could actually carry that risk was a TV station, so to speak. It was no cost for them. So what is a risk for you is an investment for someone else.
Fantastic.
And his was $5,000. Now, what has he done? He has applied several principles. He's taken the risk as he's broken it down. The first principle of risk is, first question to us is, can this risk be insured? The second question to ask is, can this risk be shifted or shared with someone who's better able to bear it? Then you have to think about, when is the risk an investment for someone else? The third principle is, if it cannot be insured, if it cannot be shared or shifted, insurance is also a form of sharing or shifting, but I want to separate those two. If it cannot be insured, and if it cannot be shared or shifted, then that's the residual risk. Spend your imagination before you spend your money. The residual risk, try and bootstrap it. Try and see how much you can bring it down so that you get it down to zero level. So that's the creative part. I think that's what the entrepreneurial method is. It is trying to codify what people do and put it into some kind of a structure so that we can learn from that and practice entrepreneurship, not necessarily to create new businesses, but as a way of managing, being good practitioners of managers and business executives.
Okay, moving on to the next question. There is another question. With the broad experience across Indian and US markets, what are some major lessons that can be learned from each other? So Harsha asks this question.
Well, I think from the US, it is this constant need for trying new things, having a wide imagination. They don't have a lot of people here don't have a fear of failure as such. The established institutions of entrepreneurship, venture capital, private equity, the new internet forms of investments, etc. Those are all great things from the US we can learn. From India, I would say Jugaad is the one that I've learned the most. That's fantastic, and that's something we can share with the rest of the world in very, very creative ways. I think there are lots of good things in India as well. Places like Pune and Bengaluru and others have become so entrepreneurial. And that's, I think, there's also a lot of traffic between India and USA. That's another positive thing that has happened. The other thing that is happening in USA is this idea of entrepreneurship is being taken to school level. Schools are beginning to teach principles of entrepreneurship. I don't think India, we are still doing that.
We are starting with it, Professor. In fact, the inaugural session of this Entrepreneurship Gyan was taken by the first mission director of Atal Innovation Mission. And they are starting to create tinkering labs and sort of those kind of things, both in the undergrad programs around within India, but also taking it to schools and other institutions. Yeah.
I mean, middle school.
Yeah.
And middle school.
So they're taking it to high schools and stuff like that. Maybe it will take a little bit more time to go to junior school.
That's the big promise in the future.
Yeah.
It's because we've done a lot of things. We've learned from each other. The big promise, taking this idea of entrepreneurship, in particular the entrepreneurial method. Why do we teach mathematics to even kindergartners? We don't teach mathematics to human beings because they're all going to become mathematicians. Why do we teach the scientific method, this idea of hypothesis and testing hypotheses to everybody? We don't do that because they're all going to become scientists. We teach it because that's a part of being a human being. I think the entrepreneurial method is also part of being a human being, because the entrepreneurial method tells you how to investigate in unknown spaces and make that a concrete reality. So if you think of it that way, then this is something that can be taught to everyone.
Yeah. And I think this professor on that as well, like the previous session we had Dr. Preet come in from one district, one product initiative scheme from the government of India. And then this was a similar question that I'd asked him, saying if we could sort of nudge people at the grassroots level, be it in say rural areas or tier 3, tier 2 cities of the country, that would sort of create a cascading effect. Now, what he had mentioned was we are still sort of a work in progress, because via sort of their initiative, they start looking at the untapped markets. But again, that sort of a change is something that will come in the years to come. So I think I would keep a very positive outlook, as most people would sort of want to, get into this venture across different areas, start with new products. So that's something that maybe something we could look at in the future.
I think, Venu, there are other questions as well. For example, I see one question from Shantanu Roy.
Shantanu, yeah, we should take that.
Yeah,
so,
please.
Professor Shantanu is asking, there's been a lot of talk about MVP. What are your perspectives on it?
I will confess I'm not an expert on MVP, so I shouldn't stray far beyond my area of expertise. In certain contexts, I think minimum viable product is a good one. And there's a popular saying that don't let perfection get in the way of progress. I think when perfection, let me put it this way, MVPs are very useful in contexts where you don't know the problem or the solution clearly. When the problem is well known, right, MVP may be less valuable. Or when the solution is well known, MVP might not be very valuable. But in those middle spaces where you have a you don't have clear understanding of the problem, where you have to define it well, where you don't have a clear understanding of the solution and you have to define it well. Those kinds of places, MVP would be very useful. I actually have a slide which might help in this regard. Let me see if I can open that slide. Just give me a moment.
Yeah. I think Venu, we have one more question from Pawan, which we can take. And yeah, almost because we're ending as well.
Right, and I think it's quite an important question here, Professor. It's asking us how important is access to capital, and Indian entrepreneurs face a lot of headwind right at the start because of this. So what can they sort of do in that angle?
Excellent. Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Then you can do here. Use slideshow. Can you see my slide?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, I've got two dimensions. Resources on one, opportunities on the other. So for the resource, pursue opportunities with good awareness of resources required, pursue opportunities without good awareness of resource required. My earlier statement about problems and solution. On the opportunities dimension, pursue opportunities in domains familiar to the entrepreneur, pursue opportunities in domains unfamiliar to the entrepreneur. When you know what resources are required and is in a familiar domain, it's like puzzle solving. Right? You know all the pieces, you just have to bring it into the right places. If you don't have good awareness of resources, but you know this, it's a domain that is familiar to you. So this is like mystery solving. You know who done it, you know who the murderer is, you just have to solve the mystery. You pursue opportunities that are unfamiliar to the entrepreneur, but you have good awarenesses of resources required. This is like effectuating. Be open-ended about final outcomes, but start with resources currently controlled. Do an MVP here. You have your resources, you know what resources you have, craft an MVP here, and then take it out to people and say, what do you think? And the last one is serendipity. Somebody may come to you with an MVP, and maybe you are the one who's going to give the solution. Or somebody may come to you with a problem, and you create something for that. It falls in your lap. This is the example of Bill Gates with the operating system, right? So this is an example of that. Okay, we can get out of here. I'll stop share. I think there was one last question. Yeah, again, I'm not a VC or anything like that. I don't do studies on VC, but can you repeat the question?
Sure, Professor. So the question Pawan is asking is, how important is access to capital? And Indian entrepreneurs face a headwind right at the start because of this. So what are the mitigating actions or strategies that they can involve to work around this?
You should never raise capital when the level of uncertainty is highest for your venture, because the cost of capital will be very high, and therefore the hurdle rate is very high. You have to jump through a very high bar in order to convince other people. The best time to raise capital is when capital wants to give you money, which means you have to get there. That is a milestone. The best time to raise at the early stages, when the uncertainty is high, you want to rely on your social network. Because at that time you need what is called goodwill capital. The capital that is invested there is not invested because of the idea. The capital that is invested there is because they want to help you. That's the goodwill capital, it's a social capital. They want to see you succeed. The early stages, the right capital source is what we call the F network. Founders, family, friends, and fools, right? At the early stages, it's the F network that is the appropriate. You use that in order to make progress in the venture. If you can use that capital to get up to the point of showing an interest in the market from early customers for your minimum viable product, then the professional capital will get interested. That's the time in which to raise money. Cost of capital will be low. It'll be easier to raise capital. You'll have people to, vouch for you, refer you. You might actually have some early customers which will help you So the first stage is F network. The second stage is people who actually have the problem, either suppliers or customers who actually have the problem. They are the ones who are most likely to give you the investment because they want to solve a problem. So the second stage of capital should be those who actually have a genuine problem and want to see solutions for the problem. They are the easier ones to, and they will not ask high equity stake and things like that. F network never asks for a high equity stake, so you can retain a lot of the equity stake, don't get diluted. People with problems want solutions. They don't want necessarily equity stake. So that's the second stage of capital. Successfully get through stages, then the conditions are right for investors to invest in you, which the third stage would be angel investors who are not organized capital, but wealthy individuals who are looking for who are either genuinely interested in promoting entrepreneurship or who are looking for returns that are better than what they can get in the equity markets, stock markets, or banks and other such sources. That's not to say it's easy, but it's a structured way of thinking. Coming back to Venu's point, I can only give you structure. I can't give you solutions.
I think Professor, all of I think most of them might not be following your academic research papers or things like that. But because I have been reading, so I understand how you have put efforts across the years to kind of codify that, or to make certain frameworks to do that same what you have been mentioning. And a lot of people might be thinking that this is maybe coming from just by your consulting experience or things like that. But just to mention that it's not only his consulting experience, rather also his experience of deep research, and which requires a lot of data, a lot of qualitative, quantitative understanding of the problem. So it's not only the consulting experience that he's talking about. Yeah.
I mean, we know that Vaibhav, very well the role of social capital.
yeah, true. Yeah. I do understand, but a lot of people, for example, are not following academic research, of entrepreneurship. So that's why I wanted to specifically focus on that as well. That that is one, just one dimension that his experiences with the consultants or with entrepreneurs and things like that, but also deep academic research as he was presenting or started with. So I think we are just there. So the final question from my side, would be, that is where I got in touch with you. So where do you think is this, entrepreneurship research is heading to? So where are we heading? What are the things which, my kind of generation should be focusing on as far as research or practices to be considered? Yeah. Please, your final comment. Yeah.
True to my preaching, Vaibhav, I'd say, do not predict, do not forecast.
All right. Perfect. Yeah.
What I am personally interested in codifying entrepreneurial method in a way that can be used in a structured way by the. I know that is not a satisfactory answer to you, but the answer there is I'm predicting that the entrepreneurial method would be a big part of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I have been trying also to understand why, for example, certain ventures fail and others do succeed well. So it has a lot to do with what you have been mentioning. But yeah, to understand factors in a broader way and quantify them and build a framework requires a lot more kind of understanding, which I have found has been kind of not been studied in certain markets. For example, emerging markets could be one, but otherwise in general as well, still people are not very clear why certain companies may fail, while others, very similar countries in some markets, will still do pretty well. So that is, for example, my what's why I've been focusing on. Yeah.
Method of codifying cannot guarantee success. All it can, if you can minimize loss, that is equally valuable.
Yeah.
Even if you cannot guarantee success. So I think there are two parts to it. So
yeah. So Venu, I think you can
finish this is to say, if you gave me a large group of IIT Mumbai, Pan IIT talent, gave each person 6 or 7 trials, I can guarantee success. But if you gave each person only 1 trial, I cannot guarantee anything.
Oh, excellent. I think, yeah.
Talent will have multiple trials. They will eventually succeed because they will learn. And it is also a stochastic game. So when you combine the two, you will get success. I think that to end on. Right?
Yeah. So Venu, I think maybe you could just give your final comments, and then I will say my final vote of thanks. Yeah.
Sure, Vaibhav. I think just sort of towards the end of the session, I think through the session, we've learned a lot. Professor Venkat, I know a lot of people here are sort of aspiring entrepreneurs, if not already in the field. They at some point of their time in their life want to do something entrepreneurial. One of the eye-opening thing that I think a lot of people will realize is you don't really need to start your own venture to be an entrepreneur. You can work in a sort of startup, you can work in a big established organization and still do something entrepreneurial. I think it's the mindset change, following some of those thought processes. I think those guidelines that you've kindly enumerated, I think just asking those kind of questions sets you in a sort of a direction that I think will yield a lot more holistic results. Because a lot of times what happens is we just look at what is in front of us without looking at where we're heading, how we want to reach there, and what are the challenges that we may encounter and how do we go about them. Or the worst case scenario, which is the other extreme, where people end up sitting thinking only about the challenges, saying, oh, I might encounter challenge 1A, 1B, 1C, 2A, 2B, 2C. These will be my approaches to them without actually doing anything. So I think when you start looking at all of these and put all of that into that amalgamated formula of 8-step approach that you'd put together, I think that sort of just opens your mind up to a lot of these key considerations, which one would, make in life. It doesn't just have to be a startup, but I think definitely it's a sort of structured way to head towards a startup. So thank you for taking your time out and going through these in detail with us. I'm sure a lot of people, and we can see that in the comments as well, appreciated this and were glad that they, left out the cricket match and attended this live and were able to ask their questions and get some of those details clarified. So thank you for attending, and thank you for the time that you've invested in this session.
Yeah, just I think already time is over, Professor. So I would just take this opportunity to thank you again for your precious time spending with us. And also we are making a small platform where for sure I would invite you to be one of our mentors, because I particularly feel a lot of them would still be awaiting for mentors like you to add value in whichever way you would love to. And thanks a lot for your time. And yeah, it was fantastic. I think already you might have already seen the comment. It was really fantastic. Yeah, thanks a lot, Professor. Yeah.
Thank you, Venu. Thank you, Vaibhav, for this opportunity. Thank you for your kind words. I enjoyed my morning, and as we always like to talk, and so you gave me the opportunity to talk to.
All right, Professor.